On Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, Americans will go to the polls to elect the next president of the United States. For many, election 2024 will be the most defining political moment of their lifetimes. The outcome will have far-reaching implications not only for the nation, but for the entire world. As with any date in history, there is a quality of time to this moment. A quality that can be discerned and described using the esoteric arts as a means of interpreting the powerful archetypal currents that flow through this challenging period of world history. The citizens of the United States will decide between two candidates, a stark choice that has divided the American electorate like perhaps no other in the nation's short but eventful political history. While the outcome is uncertain, there is a high degree of probability that the results will be contested for days and even weeks after the polls officially close on the evening of November 5th. Using the lens of both astrology and human design, in this video we will examine the quality of this day in history and how it powerfully intersects with the personal destinies of each of these two presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. While this analysis is not designed to be predictive per se, it may prove quite useful and even eye-opening in revealing the subtle energies that will be swirling in the air across America on this monumental day, and may provide us with some profound insights into the reasons for the eventual outcome. So let's dive in as we explore the archetypal energies of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Hi everyone, welcome to this special Election 2024 edition of the Lab. Doing something a little different here with this episode and maybe a series of videos leading up to what's probably going to be a pretty important date, whether it will be the most significant election in U.S. history, I don't know. It's certainly one that carries a lot of weight. It has a lot of energy and attention and focus on it. I can't remember an election in my lifetime that has been more charged than this one. So thought I would share some insights, and this is something that I often do when I'm here by myself in my Astro Lab here, is I'm looking at charts all the time. And I've been particularly fascinated with looking at the date of November 5th, this election day. What is in the stars? What is the patterns that are emerging? And how do they relate to the two candidates, right? We've got Trump, we've got Harris. They each have their own natal charts. And when we look at the transits for that day, some things are going to be apparent. Some energy patterns that are going to reinforce or challenge their natal positions, right? I've also started integrating human design, and I'm looking at the transit charts for that day as well. So a lot of minutia, a lot of little pieces here. And so what I'm going to do is just sample some of the readings I've done and try to give you the best picture I can for what is the sort of astrological and what really archetypal configurations that we can expect to unfold on election day. How does that relate to each of the candidates? And can we see patterns emerging that would point one way or the other as to being more supportive or challenging to each of these candidates? Now, I'm not making predictions per se, right? We're just looking at patterns. All of astrology, human design, all of these divination tools, these esoteric arts are really about pattern recognition. What are the patterns that are emerging through these cyclically repeating cycles of planetary positions? So we recognize patterns, we observe the pattern, and we correlate those with the meanings and the significance of the cycles historically, and then project them into the future. Now, no two moments are the same. We can't say any 2 points in any cycle are the same. There are cyclically recurring themes, but each one presents a unique moment in time, right? And as Famously, Carl Jung once said, anything that is born at this time has a quality of this time. So what are we looking at here? We're going to look at what is the quality of this time we are moving through, right? Very contentious, very challenging. There is a lot of astrological significance to this time. Not just this date, but if we look at what will be the first year or two of whomever becomes the next president is going to be presiding over some very, very changing times in our historical patterns. Huge shifts, not only in the astrology with all of the outer planets shifting signs over the next 18 months. We've got the 2027 date in human design looming in just a few short years, which will occur under the next presidency. So it's a very significant event that will sort of set the theme for how all of these other events unfold over the next 4 years. Will be, I think, a very monumental time in the history of this nation and will have, reverberations throughout the world. So worth looking at, worth using these tools. Again, these are sense-making tools. I'm using them to make sense of my world, trying to understand what's really going on here through these very unique lenses of astrology and human design. And I think using them in a synthesized and integrated fashion gives even deeper insights that neither of the two, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as always, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to edit together some little snippets here so that we can compress this as much as possible because there's a lot of information to get through. And just one disclaimer, that this is an apolitical channel. I don't use astrology. I think that's why astrology is so useful, because it is apolitical, and it is amoral in that sense. And I mean that in the positive sense. It is beyond morality. It's not trying to make a moral judgment that this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. It's really this and that. It just is, right? We're just looking at the patterns and what's present and reading the symbols and their deepest meaning. And we can also always look at, light and shadow, right? Each of these archetypes has sort of more positive and negative implications. Those are just the energy patterns that are present at any given time. We have the choice to engage with these archetypes in the way that we see fit. Of course, if we're doing it unconsciously and without awareness, as maybe some of our leaders sometimes do, then we may seem to be thrown at the whims of fate. But if we do it with awareness, at least we have some sense of agency, some sense of some control of our destiny. Maybe that's just another word for accepting your fate. But all right, without further ado, let's jump in and let's look at some of these charts. Okay, so where should we begin our exploration of election 2024? Well, the most logical place to start is to look at the chart for election day, right? So that's what I've brought up here. I've cast a chart for November 5th, 2024 at 7 a.m. in Washington, D.C. Of course, this is when the polls will open on the East Coast on election day. And here's a look at the chart, right? Which there are some really powerful aspects that we're going to look at in detail in this video. But the first thing I was really considering when I thought about it is, of course, here we are just after sunrise with the sun at 13 degrees of Scorpio. And I thought about this degree and this point and the fact that, why are we even going to the polls on a Tuesday, right? Rather than a Saturday when everyone has the day off, or a Friday, we make it a national holiday so that more people can get out to vote, right? It's very difficult for people to vote on a Tuesday, right? And, this actually dates back to the mid-1800s. And the reason is farmers, right? Back 150, 180 years ago, America was an agrarian nation. We were mostly a nation of farmers. And so the reason that we vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, because technically that's the date that we choose, is so that farmers could get to their polling places, right? This was after the harvest, after the fall harvest, so people had time to go to the polls, but before the new year. And Tuesday was the best day because they had markets on Wednesday or Thursday, and many people had to travel overnight to their polling places by horse and buggy usually to get to the polls. So you couldn't travel on a Sunday, of course. That was the Lord's Day. So Monday would be a good travel day. Tuesday you could get to the polls. You could be back home by Wednesday and be ready for market on Thursday. That's why we elect our president on the first Tuesday of November. So one of the many sort of anachronistic parts of our political process here in America that I think are ripe for some updating, wouldn't you say? But so be it. That's what we've inherited, and that's the traditions we still have, along with the Electoral College, which is, much is talked about whether that needs to be updated and revived as well. But here we are. First Tuesday in November 2024 falls on the 5th, and we're at the 13th degree. So why am I talking about the degree of Scorpio? As I was considering and contemplating the chart here, I thought, be interesting to look at the Sabian symbol for this day, right? And so what are the Sabian symbols, in case you're not familiar with them? The Sabian symbols were something that was created in the mid-1920s, as a matter of fact. It was an astrologer, a guy by the name of Mark Edmund Jones, and his associate, who was a psychic or clairvoyant. I believe her name was Elsie Wheeler, right? And so he would give her a card. He would hold up a card that he looked at that had every degree of the zodiac, and they were randomly shuffled, so she didn't know what they were. There was no sequence to them, and she would just intuit a symbol. Whatever she saw, he would write down for each of the degrees of the zodiac. And this became what is known as the Sabian symbols, right? This was done in the 1920s. I think Jones first published his book, which I have a copy of here, The Sabian Symbols in Astrology. The first edition was in the 1950s. And so he sort of interpreted all of these symbols that she had intuited. And then another book I would highly recommend, this is one's called The Astrological Mandala, The Cycles of Transformation, and its 360 Symbolic Phases. Quite a long title, but that's how Dane Rudyard rolled back in the day. Of course, Dane Rudyard, one of the most influential astrological thinkers and writers of the 20th century. This was published in 1973. So if you're looking for a great reference book, this is a good one. And he really, I think, synthesized them in a way beyond even what Jones originally had done in the original Sabian Symbols book. He found the pattern that emerged from all of these symbols. So a long sort of tangent, but worth noting about and understanding how these Sabian symbols work, where they come from, that they originated in the 1920s, but they're still resonant today, and they have become an integral part of our sort of the esoteric toolkit that we work with as astrologers and tarot readers and whatnot. So interesting to integrate those. So as I looked at this 13th degree, and of course, because it's in 1333, we're going to read it as 14 Scorpio. Of course, you always kind of move to the next degree in the reading. So the image that the clairvoyant got for this degree of Scorpio is telephone lineman at work installing new connections. And here's a kind of a nice piece of artwork that an artist has created for all the Sabian symbols. I'll credit her in the description so you can look at her work. It's really quite evocative. And then Rudyard gave keywords for all of these and explanations, but I just wanted to put those up here because I think they are relevant here. I was really quite astonished by a lot of the symbolism that comes out in the actual degrees of all of the aspects that we're going to look at in this video. So pretty fascinating to pull this all together as another way, another lens that we can peer into this day and this deep, deep symbolism of what's unfolding in the collective. So keyword here is the will to association or comprehension. And if you think about this, you know, how impactful the birth of the telephone, the telegraph, right? This was the first time that the world was really connected. We began to wire the world, right? A connection like had never existed in humanity before. And I would argue the world we've lived in since the birth of electricity and the telephone, the telegraph, the radio, television, film, all of these technologies, these electronic technologies have completely changed the world since the mid 1800s. So, the wiring of the world was such an important effort during that time, and we are still living within that paradigm, right? You think about how it changed from that industrial or pre-modern world into the world that we live in today, and how symbolic, here's a Norman Rockwell painting, right, of the lineman, right? The importance of that, connecting the world, neighborhood by neighborhood, one city, one town at a time. And if you think about the network that we live in now, it all is formed on the backbone of the original grid, the electrical grid, the utility grid, telephone lines, and then cable lines, and all these things, right? Now, if we were to think about interpreting this symbol in today's world, right, well, we would probably be thinking about not the telephone lines, but the wireless network, right? We've gone from a wired world to a wireless world, right? So this would be a modern interpretation of, I would think about, Verizon putting together the 5G network, right? Of course, this is a different world. Same metaphor, same symbol, but this is the world we live in now. Just putting it in terms of what we're dealing with in our world today and in the light of the election, how are we comprehending this election and its import? How are we being influenced by who we vote for, who we align with? What is our association politically? What party do you associate with? What candidate do you associate with? What worldview do you associate? And how do you comprehend the world that informs that worldview? All of us are being influenced by this deep media environment that we are just immersed in. We are swimming in media. So whether you get your information from, NBC News or CNN or Fox or the Oath Network, or, whether you're getting it from TikTok or you're getting it from Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it now, right? Think about how we're being influenced to comprehend the world. Right? So this degree of Scorpio, as we consider this to be setting the tone, if you will, for our election day, I was thinking okay, who controls the message? Where is the information coming from? We're talking about a world where each of these campaigns is spending millions of dollars on television ads, radio ads, social media ads, phone banks. Right? We still use phone banks. This telephone is still alive in many ways. That network is still being used. So this is a very rich symbol as I was considering, what is the tone of the day? Communication. Who controls the network? Who controls the message better on this day? Is that going to have an impact on the results? Something to deeply contemplate. Now, as the day progresses, it's interesting to see the sun is actually going to change degrees over the course of this election day, which is kind of a fun thing to observe, and I'm just going to demonstrate that for you. If we go hour by hour, right, here we have sunrise on the East Coast in DC. Every couple hours, the sun moves higher in the sky and moves into a new house for that day, and a different sign will be rising, right? So if we get into, say, noontime, approaching noon, or here we're at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? We see we've got Pisces is now rising. The sun is in the 9th house. But one thing that's interesting, if we go to about, I'm trying to get this exact here, sometime at about 5:30 in the afternoon on election day in Washington, D.C., here on the East Coast, so just before sunset, we can see that the sun moves into the 14th degree of Scorpio. So it's going to change the Sabian symbol for the day. So we're going to look at two symbols and what maybe the energy shift that might occur as the election day progresses, right? Pretty fascinating. So if we go from this image of the telephone lineman at work installing new connections, and we look at the next Scorpio symbol, which is 15 degrees, here we have something completely different. right? Children playing around 5 mounds of sand, right? And another one of these very beautiful, evocative paintings by this artist. And here, Rudyard gives us these keywords: future-oriented growth. Right? And I thought, this is one of those, many of these symbols are really, they're kind of abstract, they're very evocative, they could be interpreted in many ways. But as I contemplated this symbol, that specifically the number 5, right? Well, there's a number indicated here, these 5 mounds of sand being played with by children. I made the connection to swing states, right? And it's interesting if we look at the swing state map, if you will. Here's some of the many targeted states in all of the elections. But there are actually 7 swing states that everyone agrees are going to decide this election. And this has been true of election cycles going back 20 years plus, right? We've kind of come down to these essential swing states. And there are 5 on the East Coast, and there are 2 on the West Coast. So I just kind of made this association of, children playing around 5 mounds of sand, right? 5 swing states where this election will most likely be decided, right? And, this interesting sort of metaphor of children playing in these mounds of sand. I thought of, to my mind, and this is not to be pejorative in any way or, looking down on it, but when you see interviews with undecided voters in swing states, we've been inundated with this, the media is just showing us interviews all the time, like, who are these undecided voters who haven't made a decision yet about who they're going to vote for? It's so interesting and fascinating, and there is almost a sort of naivete to these people. They're not sort of deeply political or aware or informed in a way where most people have already made a decision, right? There's sort of this innocence, really, this naivete, a childlike innocence in their approach to the election. And again, that's not pejorative. I'm not criticizing them. It's just an observation, and it's fascinating. I'm always like, who are the undecided voters? Like, what's that process like for them? So, here we have this really rich, evocative symbol that could sort of help us sort of understand the dynamics of this time, right? This idea of children playing in the sand, right? And the sand metaphor is also very rich. There's a sense of, the lines of a sand, drawing a line in the sand. You think about how much effort has been put into time, money, effort into redistricting, redrawing the lines. You look at that electoral map, it doesn't even make sense, right? It's, all of these districts, and it's been a battle back and forth between the 2 dominant parties to try to redraw the American electoral map in their favor. And again, this electoral college, to my mind, is something that is completely anachronistic and probably needs to be overhauled. I would have thought we would have done something by now, 2024, but here we are still using this, 18th century agrarian model for how we elect the modern president of the United States. It's mind-boggling, really. But, what an interesting symbol. And so it's interesting, too, that as we approach towards the end of the day, I think the polls will start to close on the East Coast at this time as we shift from these 2 symbols. So is it the children playing around in these 5 mounds of sand, right? And there is a future-oriented growth to this symbol, right? So it really is, where are we pointing towards? Are we pointing towards the future? Are we pointing towards the past? And very much, the future of America and the direction of the world is going to be determined perhaps by these swing state voters in these 5 swing states. And where do they draw the line in the sand? What do they see as their vision of the future? Very much is going to inform how this election might turn out. Now, what I want to do is now show you what I think are the probably most important patterns that are emerging on this day, I want to draw your attention to, I think, the most important planet on election day in many ways will be Mars. We'll see that on election day, Mars will have just moved into the sign of Leo, 0 degrees, right? And we'll see that it is in opposition to Pluto in Capricorn at the 29th degree, what's known as the anaretic degree of any sign, the death degree, if you will, which is in the bounds of Mars when it's in Capricorn. So there's something very intense about this Pluto-Mars alignment. It's an opposition. I've talked about this cycle many times on the channel, dating back to the beginning of the Ukraine invasion. It was exactly coincided with Mars conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. So now we look at their oppositions and their squares. This is a cycle of intensity and a cycle of violence in many ways. So that gives us a little concern. As an astrologer, I don't love this opposition on an election day, right? There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of potential aggression that could take place under the influence of this aspect. So I would say this is sort of the backbone or the spine of the day. And so we'll look deeper in that, but we can also see Mars is involved in what we would call a grand fire trine here. So I'm drawing this triangle, which you can see. What does that involve? Well, it's aspecting both the North Node in Aries, a fire sign, as well as Neptune in Pisces. And then we've got Mercury over here in Sagittarius. So this is a really powerful, passion-filled sort of aspect and constellation of these planets who are all aligned in a harmonious way in order to integrate and instantiate something powerful, something new, something that is initiatory. That's what fire element gives us. So all these planets, Mars, Mercury, and the North Node along with Neptune, all are interrelated in a way that's going to really set the tone of the day, the time we're moving through. So Mercury here as the communicator, the messenger, who has the more powerful message, who has the more philosophical or spiritually motivated message, right? Sagittarius, that's going to motivate voters. And I think it will come down to, whose philosophy is more appealing to the electorate. There's something connected to the message and Mars, right? Mars is the aggression. Mars is the power point. And we're going to see both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have Mars in Leo in their natal charts, which is another reason I believe this is the pivot symbol for this day, possibly for this election. Mars's energy will throw its weight, if you will, behind one of these two candidates in a profound way. And we're going to look at that when we look at their charts. So here we have the trine, we have the opposition, and then there's also this, what we would call a kite pattern, right? Because then this point where Pluto is kind of right in between both these, the North Node and Mercury. This is all very harmonious, as a matter of fact, right? This is creating something that is really aligned. You don't see these patterns very often, but when they do, it tends to show us something really elegant and easy. So if there's any reason to be optimistic about the outcome of this election day, that it will go smoothly, right? That we will have a harmonious and easy and peaceful process. It is in the constellation. It is in the stars, as we would say. But to me, the linchpin becomes this opposition between Pluto and Mars. If this were any other planets, I would lean towards this overpowering and overwhelming beneficial or harmonious influence, right? There's just a lot more positive aspects being made. You got another sort of interesting trine pointing to this point. And again, it's right here at the midheaven if we look at it at this time when the sun moves into that 14th degree and moves into this time of the children playing in the sand, right? And in many ways, we're a very young nation, right? America is not very old in terms of, the nations on the earth, right? We're one of the newest nations that exists. But in recent history, we've come to dominate the world scene. But in many ways, this is the childhood of America. You know, we're going through some growing pains, right? We're kind of like a teenage nation in many ways, right? We're going through puberty, or we're going through adolescence, and as a collective, we have some growing up to do, right? And you've heard this language, and if you've been listening to the media over the course of the past week, you know, one of the platforms is, you know, we need an adult in the White House, right? This is a slam from the Democrats against Trump, that he's a child. He's an impetuous kind of childlike character, and we need some adult leadership, right? Interesting, just listening to all these metaphors. Really start to tune your ear to the more, you know, archetypal language that's being perpetrated, being used, the messaging. I find it really helpful to navigate and make sense of a very complex media environment, right? Using these symbols as a way of getting that more bird's eye view. Step one layer back, you know, step out of the information bubble, the media bubble that you're in. Really try to say, what's really going on here? I think that's a more informed and sensible approach, which is why I think these tools are useful. So a lot to consider here in terms of this configuration. This is really powerful. There's a lot of aspecting. So to me, it's the struggle between which one of these forces are more powerfully aligned, right? Is this the fiery passion of initiating something new, right? Or are we going back to the past? And I think that's a really important question, right? And I want to look at really the symbol of Pluto. You know, and if you followed this channel, you know I've been talking a lot about Pluto and Capricorn and moving into Aquarius. It has been the great theme of recent history, for good reason, right? Since 2008, Pluto has been moving through the sign of Capricorn, right? And for the past year and a half, we've had this point where Pluto is crossing a threshold between Capricorn and Aquarius. So starting last year, it started to dip its toes into Aquarius, and then it would move back into Capricorn. Earlier this year, it dipped its toes into Aquarius and then moved back into Capricorn, right? Now it's moving direct again, and in the next month, Pluto will move into Aquarius for good, where it will travel for the next 20 years. So from 2024 to 2044, we will be in a new era. We will be in the Pluto and Aquarius era. And I really believe that this shift, this transition, if you will, from Capricorn to Aquarius is really the most fundamental theme of these times that we're moving through. So let's take a just deeper look at what that means in terms of the energies of these two signs and what this planet of power, right? Pluto is all about power. Pluto is a very political planet, right? The politics of the time are very much informed by Pluto's transit through the sign of the time, political upheaval, right? So when we're thinking about politics, we're thinking about Pluto. You know, where we get the word, you know, a plutocracy comes from this same symbol. And we very much have a bit of a plutocratic world that we're moving into in many ways. Something interesting to know. So we've been moving through Capricorn since 2008, right? Where it's all about achievement, security, structure, order, right? It's very traditional, very authoritarian. It's cautious, it's miserly, it's serious, prudent, right? It has this pessimistic, sensible quality to it. What's practical? What's traditional, right? Let's go back, right? Not surprising that in the middle of Pluto and Capricorn, a message, make America great again, go back to the past, going back to traditional values. That has been the theme of this Pluto and Capricorn era, right? 2008 to right now, right? Think about the very conservative efforts that have been made, the overturning of Roe Wade and conservative judges. It's been a move backwards into a more traditional time, right? Make America great again. Let's go back to When was America great, right? And that's the great debate we're having. When was it great, right? And if we look at, I think the symbol, we'll get a sense of this transition that we're moving through. So we got Pluto in Capricorn, and now we're moving into Pluto in Aquarius. Totally different energy. We're going from this cardinal earth of achievement and security and the Saturnian orderliness to Aquarius, fixed air. I know the truth, right? This is all about technological freedom and rebelliousness and a scientific process of using reason. It's future-oriented, humanitarian. This is like the bottom-up grassroots symbol of the equality of humanity. Versus Capricorn, which is the top-down authoritarian hierarchy of, you could say this is the patriarchy or any sort of hierarchical orientation to society. And now we're moving into this time where they're all coming into question. Over this next 20 years will be incredibly revolutionary. But this is the battle that's taking place right now. Those who want to stay conservative and cautious and move back to traditional values, who are callous, single-minded, serious, stern, prudent, right? Versus those who want to move into the future of a free-thinking, progressive, reforming. Of course, it's unpredictable. The future is not predictable. People who lean towards the past, they feel like I can depend on the past. I know what that's about. It's not unpredictable. It's very predictable. This is the essential, I think this is the fundamental theme that we are moving through, and I feel like this election, in many ways, is a perfect expression of this transfer of power. And the fact that in the chart, it's at the 29th degree, the very last degree. This is the last grasp of that conservative instinct, right? The last chance to actually preserve what many in the conservative movement think is worth preserving because they feel like the world is getting away from them. They don't see themselves in this future that's unfolding. Let's go back to when America was great, right? Interesting, this is not a new phrase. This is not something that Trump's people have originated. They actually borrowed it, stole it from Reagan. That was part of Reagan's slogan in 1980. Let's make America great again. And interestingly enough, here's young Donald Trump shaking hands with then President Reagan, right? So his political ambitions go way back. This is not a new phenomenon for him. This is a long game he's been playing. And you can draw a straight line from Reagan to Trump in many ways. Make America one again. This is a very, not so subtle really, call for, a unified, what I would say one is one Christian nation under God. And that's what many Trump supporters are advocating for. So choice is going backward with Trump or forward with Kamala Harris. And she'll say, we're not going back. It's all about moving forward. It's all about the future oriented, right? Very easy to see Trump is Capricorn, Harris is Aquarius, and this is the choice that Americans are making at the polls. If you want to reduce it to this very primal symbolism on an archetypal level, bam, here you have it, right? It's that simple. What's your choice? What is the future of America? Is it the past or is it a future that's unknown and uncertain but has potential? Or is it the security of the past, right? I want to make a point about Pluto and Capricorn, which went into Capricorn in 2008, which was during the great financial crisis, right? This was the key event that triggered the Capricorn era of Pluto. It really was a challenge to the structure, the financial structure of the world came under incredible stress. And to my mind, one of the great disappointments of the Obama era was there was a chance to really rebuild the financial structure that had become so corrupt. And, we had these massive bailouts, trillions of dollars. And if you think about the continuity there, you had Bush and Paulson, and then you had Obama and Geithner, right? These two guys, Wall Street insiders. This is how the banks got bailed out. We didn't fix the system. We put a Band-Aid on it. We printed trillions of dollars, and they all got bonuses. And it's business as usual. Pluto and Capricorn, we could say 2008 to 2024, business as usual, right? That's the great opportunity missed. And we're still living in the shadow of what didn't happen, the reform that was possible during the financial crisis that never changed, and we're still in the same precarious position in the world global financial markets as we were back in 2008. Will Pluto in Aquarius actually finally revolutionize and reform the corrupted system? Well, that's a really good question, and that really frames, to my mind, again, Pluto in Capricorn versus Pluto in Aquarius. Are we going back or are we going forward? And so it's really interesting if you look at the spheres of influence of these two candidates, right? And of late, you've gotten Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, who have thrown their support behind Trump. Quite surprisingly, I think many were surprised by Kennedy's endorsement. I'll be honest, I'm one of them. I'm still quite baffled by that move on his part. But, we also have billionaire Elon Musk, who has now started appearing at rallies with Donald Trump. And here's a face you may not recognize, but behind the scenes, one of the more important political donors to the Republican Party. This is a guy named Timothy Mellon, right? You may recognize him by his last name. Mellon of Carnegie Mellon, Andrew Mellon, one of the wealthiest families in America, right? This guy's a billionaire who is supporting Trump, right? So the question is, who is getting influenced by the billionaires? Well, Trump's got billionaires, but so does Harris, right? She's also got pop stars, right? She got Beyonce and Taylor Swift, who are, well, they're multi-millionaires. I don't know if they're billionaires yet, but they have a lot of influence in the culture. But then you got guys like Bill Gates, right? Democrats have their billionaires too, right? Here's Jamie Dimon, right, who would likely become the next Treasury Secretary in a Harris administration. The continuity, you could go from Paulson to Geithner to Dimon, and the same people are making the same decisions. I'm showing this graphic because in many ways, this is really the bigger picture, right? Progressive, conservative, right? They all talk a good game, but if you really want to know where their hearts are, follow the money, right? The interest of these billionaires is really what's at stake, right? And most of the billionaires support both sides. They really don't care who wins or loses, as long as they can get their agenda achieved, as long as their influence and their impact on politics supports their financial interests, right? And I'm doing all this. You're like, Daljeet, why are you going all this way to talk about the election? Because I want to talk about where Pluto is, right? We said 2947 Capricorn. Well, that what we read as the 30th degree in the Sabian symbols. And what does it say? A secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. Executive power. And I got chills when I read this. When I opened the book, and I was like, I wonder what, 30 degrees Capricorn is, Pluto. What is it telling us? What is the deeper meaning from this thing that was inspired and intuited, 100 years ago, almost to the day? This symbol comes up and you're like, file under, you can't write this shit, right? Like, think about that message. And it's all about executive power. Who is going to be the executive in power? And the secret meeting of men, right? Think about, here we have Davos 2024 and the round table hosted by the World Economic Forum, right? And this is when the cameras are on and the lights are on. Look at what we have. We have this perfect union of the world, right? We've got a Sikh man and we've got a Muslim woman hosted by a white woman here. I think we only got the one white guy with his back to us, but this looks very global, very worldly, very well represented. But it's not the public meetings at Davos that really we should be concerned with. It's the secret meetings behind closed doors. Who are those guys? Well, they're all old white guys, right? This is the perfect symbol for this Pluto in Capricorn last grasp of the power structure. These are power brokers you never elected, right? Secret meetings where decisions are being made in world affairs. And if you don't think that both Trump and Harris, both the Democrats and the Republicans, are not beholden to their billion-dollar donors, then you are naive, mistaken. This is really where politics and power brokers have the greatest influence. This is where the game is being played at the highest level. And this is where astrology shows us how this is happening, right? It's fascinating. Power brokers. And this is not a new phenomenon, right? Anyone who has done their history, great book I would recommend, The Creature from Jekyll Island, talks about how the Federal Reserve was created back in the 1900s. A bunch of bankers and politicians got together and hatched the plan for the Federal Reserve and created fractional reserve banking and the financial system that we've inherited today that I've been talking about. This happened 100 years ago, right? It's the same kind of thing. Secret meetings, behind closed doors, making decisions on world affairs. So keep your eyes on the prize, people. This is where this stuff is really happening, right? Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto really going. So Pluto in Capricorn, this is the power grab. My instinct tells me this is where it's at. And then I want to consider Mars. Why is Mars so important? Because that seems to be the active trigger. And as I said before, both Harris and Trump have Mars natally in Leo. What is the Sabian symbol for this Mars in Leo at 0 degrees? Well, blood rushes to a man's head as his vital energies are mobilized under the spur of ambition. Keyword, conflagration, right? What does this mean? Conflagration. It means firestorm. It means it's explosive. There's something fiery about this symbol, right? And I honestly, when I looked at this, I don't know about you, all I could see was Gaza and Lebanon and the Ukraine, right? And as I said earlier, this Pluto-Mars aspect has been deeply tied to the Ukraine war. Not so much the war in the Middle East, but war in general, right? Think about Mars in Leo. What does that symbolize? Mars is the most aggressive symbol of the zodiac. It is violent. It is action-oriented. It wants to use force, use of force. Combine that with Leo, right, which is this willpower, this fixed fate of being domineering, unrelenting, leadership, bombastic, bossy, a show-off. So here's a very brash, emboldened Mars to aggressively demonstrate its leadership capacity. And then you have two candidates who both have Mars in Leo in their natal charts. So here's a side-by-side of each of the charts. And what we're going to see is, in Trump's chart, Mars is conjunct his ascendant. He's a Leo rising, right? And anyone knows Donald Trump, this is the Trump we know. This is the firebrand. Might makes right in Trump's world. Mars on the ascendant in Leo, and he's got Pluto in Leo backing it up. If you love Trump, this is what you love about him. People who love Trump love that he is a powerful leader. This is a guy who only respects dictators and authoritarian types like himself. He images himself, he imagines himself as a powerful, plutonic, Martian, dictatorial leader. When you look at Harris's chart over here, she's got it in her third house, right? So it's not as strong of a placement. For Harris, that Mars-Leo leadership comes in her communication style. She thinks with a very strategic Martian mind, perhaps, communicates with that authority, but arguably nowhere near as potent a symbol in her chart as it is in Trump's chart. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at in terms of the sort of power broker. Where does this very powerful trine show up and this opposition from Mars and Pluto, right? To me, it points to Trump's chart. For good or for ill, if you're looking for the powerful leader who will use his might to make right in the world, Trump's your guy. Everything's pointing to him. And it's all about him. This is the guy who famously said in 2016, only I can fix it. Only I can fix it. That's only something that a Mars on the ascendant with Pluto and Leo would say. No one else is going to say that. So this to me is one of the key symbols when I try to correlate, observe and correlate. Here's the theme of the time, the quality of the day. And then how is that going to impact each of these candidates individually, right? That's one way. This Mars shows up for me as being very strong. Who is more aggressive? Now, could that backfire? Could, right? But if I'm hedging my bets, I might take the fiery candidate in this energy, in this climate, right? What's the other big symbol? There's one other big symbol I want to point to. And let me go back to the chart quickly, because we have Jupiter in Gemini. And this one also stands out to me. It's in an opposition to Venus over here in Sag, which is interesting. The two benefics opposed to each other. This is another sort of really, even though it's an opposition, it's harmonious in many ways, right? The influence of Venus, the influence of Jupiter. Where is the expansion, And my question, which candidate will Jupiter throw its heavy weight behind, its optimism, its hope, its future? And again, if we look at what we get with Jupiter and Gemini, Jupiter is all about expansion, right? Optimism, hope. It's very future-oriented. But here we find it in Gemini, right? It's all about ideas. It's about information. It's about talk, right? But it's also two-faced and opinionated, right? It can be capricious and divided. And I couldn't find a more potent symbol for where we are as a nation. We are completely divided. We are almost schizophrenic in our identity, very Gemini-like, right? Where is the future? Where is the truth? It lies somewhere in between these two candidates. Trump's a Gemini. He has Sun, North Node, Uranus in Gemini in his 11th house. This is the social media president right here, folks, right? This is the guy who communicates through Twitter and social media and gets his message directly to the people. He's always been sort of a maverick in that way. He really has used media in innovative new ways. Uranus, right? Unpredictable. You never know what's going to come out of this guy's mouth. Uranus in Gemini, conjunct his North Node. But this is a guy who just feels like, I have a special destiny to fulfill. I am meant to be the leader. There's a certain regal quality to the sun in this side of the chart. The sun moving through the 11th house is a very strong placement. There's a reason why this guy has made his way to the top. He has a very strongly placed sun in his chart. So for him to have Jupiter, which is exactly conjunct his North Node on election day, is a second symbol to me that throws its weight behind Trump. On the other hand, if we look at Harris's chart, well, she's a Gemini ascendant, so it's very prominent in her chart as well, and it will be very, very close to conjuncting her North Node on her ascendant. So very interesting to note that both of these candidates have the same nodal axis, which I think is fascinating. South Node Sag, North Node Gemini. South Node Sag, North Node Gemini. They're actually born 18 years apart. Trump in 46, and you can't see that here, but Harris in 64. The nodal cycle is an 18-year cycle, which means this is also a generational symbol. And this is actually very much a generational election. We think about Pluto as being not only that political symbol of transformation, and we're moving into a new Plutonian era, but it's also the symbol of each of our generations. Trump comes from the Pluto and Leo generation. We can go all the way back to, I think Bill Clinton was our first Leo president. The only exception in that period has been Barack Obama, who, like Harris, is part of the Pluto in Virgo generation. And I will argue as an astrologer, despite the outcome of this, it really is time for some Pluto in Virgo leadership in the world. Not just in the White House, but the big decision makers and leaders of industry across the globe need some more Pluto in Virgo sensibility to solve the very hard problems that we are facing as a species. You know, the Pluto and Leo gang, they did a great job. They were awesome. Their music was awesome. Their art was awesome. Their leadership was awesome. But guess what? Time to exit stage left, Pluto and Leo. Right? I think this was the thing that many of us in America were lamenting, right? You had two old white guys, Pluto and Leos, running for president, refusing to let go of power. It's a very Pluto and Leo thing. They don't want to, you know, out of my cold, dead hands, right? That's the Pluto and Leo approach to power. It's time to pass the baton on to a new generation. So in one ways, that is what Harris exemplifies for many younger Americans, most likely, is it's a new era, it's a new generation, a new time of new leadership. Will that come to be on election day? Hard to say. So again, as I started this video, I was saying this is not a prediction, right? This is an analysis of the quality of the time and how these very powerful planetary influences operate on an archetypal level to influence us all. We are all in this sort of archetypal soup together. We are all being moved, our passions, right? We all have our own charts, and all of these symbols are activating those in us individually. But how are we aligning to our collective identities? How will this influence this very monumentous decision? So I hope this has been sort of eye-opening for you. This is the kind of detailed, deep analysis that I love to do. This is what I spend my time, my free time in, you know, the lab here, analyzing these charts, looking at these symbols, and trying to sort of read the tea leaves, if you will. Right? You could interpret these symbols any way you want, but I think you can see there is overwhelming evidence that there is a tendency to support one side versus the other. And so I've given you some really good examples and something to really think about. It'll be interesting to observe. How do these things play out on election day? Can we observe any of these patterns, right? Will this Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, opposite Mars in Leo, rear its ugly head? Will we have some sort of conflagration in the Middle East or in Ukraine that becomes a distraction? Or some violent event anywhere in the world that can distract election day, right? Will we have troubles with the telephone linemen, the connectivity issues? Will there be some sort of communication error, something with the voting machines? Right, which all rely on this information technology in this world that we're swirling through, right? How will these 5 piles of sand, these 5 swing states on the eastern part of the United States determine the outcome of the election? Or is it these powerful billionaires who are meeting secretly to decide the future of world affairs? All of these things are co-present in this moment, and parsing them out and understanding them, none of them are in isolation, right? And then you have to really look at the integration and the synthesis of all these things and start to say, this is more likely. This is what's going on. This is the pattern that's emerging. This is where we're coming from. This is where we're going. All right. So I think it's a great tool. I think it's fascinating as shit. I hope you've enjoyed that. I probably will do a part 2 video of this, and we'll look at the human design aspect on this, which is equally as fascinating. Both the design charts of Harris and Trump, as well as the transits and what's being activated by these very planets, right? The same thing. We can look at Mars, look at Pluto, look at Jupiter, what's going on in terms of the human design and the keynoting there that can give us another lens on this very fascinating time. So hopefully you can tune in for that as well. Till then, Sat Nam, everyone.